Hi, everyone, and welcome to Brian's Horror Corner. I'm your host, Brian, and welcome to day 28 of my 31 horror movies in October Halloween series. So, today we're going to take a look at a recent favorite of mine that just from the last couple of years, a Shudder original horror anthology movie, and that is The Mortuary Collection from 2019. Actually came to Shudder in 2020, but it originally came out in 2019. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. I'm gonna have to be kind of careful with this one because it's kind of hard to describe too much without giving too much away, and I want to keep this review spoiler free. So I'll talk about it as much as I can with the setup and the different segments and then the cast. And then I'll get into my review, which will be spoiler free, as I said. So, The Mortuary Collection is a 2019 American anthology horror film written and directed by Ryan Spindell. So basically, it opens with our framing story, the first part of it, which is in a small island town of Ravens End in the 1980s. Mortician Montgomery Dart manages the Ravens End mortuary. One day, a young woman named Sam comes to respond to the help wanted sign outside. When he agrees to give her an interview, he takes her on a tour of the facility, during which Sam shows curiosity about a small child sized coffin, which Montgomery has recently performed a funeral for. Montgomery agrees to tell Sam a series of stories about those that have died in Raven's Edge, which brings us to our first segment, which is a very short one. In the 1950s, a young woman goes into a restroom during a party to check on the wallet she's pickpocketed while attending. And that's about as much as I can say about that one because it's really short. Um, and I don't want to give too much away, so you'll have to watch it. Segment two, entitled Unprotected. In the 1960s, frat boy Jake passes out condoms on campus, preaching the value of sexual liberation as an excuse to get girls to come to frat parties and sleep with the members of his fraternity. However, upon making a connection with a woman named Sandra at a party, he secretly removes his condom while having sex with her. The next morning, he finds himself with a rash and goes to the campus doctor, Dr. Kubler, for help. And then we go to segment three, Till Death. In the 1970s, Wendell Owens is depressed and devoted to taking care of his catatonic wife, Carol, forced to plan his life around her. He responds positively to his Dr. Kubler's suggestion that he accidentally overdose Carol on painkillers. However, when he tries to give them to her, she grabs his arm, then chokes on the food. The pills are hidden and forcing him to help her throw them up. When she collapses afterward, she impales her head on a statue and dies. So then we cut back to the framing story, the second part of it, which Sam complains to that Montgomery's stories, however true they may be, are predictable and follow a theme of people being punished for their sins. Montgomery leads Sam down to the mortuary sub basement, prepares to cremate the child-sized coffin. Sam stops him and tells him she's not here for a job; she's here for the dead child, and she goes on to tell him about her own story, which brings us to segment four, the final of the short segments, titled The Babysitter Murders, where one evening Sam babysits for a child named Logan. She watches a horror movie as she cooks dinner, but misses a news bulletin about an escaped patient from a local asylum. She then finds a strange man with a head wound in the house. Not sure how he got there. Not sure how he got in. Sam is uncertain about how to react until the phone rings and she hears an answering machine message about the escaped killer. And so that's the setup for that one. And then we cut back to the framing story, which finishes out the movie. But I can't really talk about that because this is a spoiler free setup and premise, and that'll give too much away if I go into the last part of the framing story. So I'll just go into the cast here. The cast wise, we have Clancy Brown as Montgomery Dark, Caitlin Custer as Sam slash Charlotte Gibbons, Christine Kilmer as Emma, Jacob um, Elordi, Elordi as Jake, Emma Horvath as Sandra, Barack Hardley as Wendell Owens, and Sarah Hay as Carol. Those are there's a lot more cast than that, but that's the main cast art. So yeah, that's the Mortuary Collection in a nutshell, and I love this movie. It's become one of my favorite horror anthologies. It's so good on so many levels. We're going to go ahead and get into here shortly, but I watched it on Netflix earlier this year in 2021 for the first time, and just like another Shudder original that I reviewed about a week ago called Scare Package, I instantly went out and got it on DVD, Blu-ray actually, because it just had that much of an effect on me. So let's just go ahead and get into the pros and the few cons that I have with the movie. So the first thing I have to talk about with the pros is the whole framing story, wraparound story, whatever you want to call it. It's easily the best of the entire anthology movie from for my money. Everything from the mood to the look to the camera work to the characters. It's just really fun it's just a really fun and effective. If I can speak and think at the same time, we can move on with this review. But it's just a really fun and effective main story. You can tell the director put a lot into the main story, and one of my complaints about some horror anthology movies is, especially some that I've reviewed earlier this month as part of this 31 horror movie list, like All Hallows Eve and even 1031, is you don't really have a lot of wraparound story. You don't have a lot of that the connectivity tissue, connective tissue to an effective wraparound story with the short stories that they tell. In this movie, you really do. They put a lot more time and effort and emphasis on this main story. So sorry about the police siren there in the background. If you can hear that, that's outside. Um, but yeah, the framing story, wraparound story, framing story, main story, whatever you want to call it, definitely one of my favorite parts of this movie. It's just so good on so many different levels. And then the second thing you have to talk about with this movie, as far as the pros go, is Clancy Brown as Montgomery Dark. He's just phenomenal. He brings a real mysterious and creepy feel to the character. The way he sounds, the way he looks, um, just everything about him, including the mortuary itself, the funeral home, the mortuary that he's in charge of. They're just so effective across the board. But yeah, Clancy Brown really delivers the character of Montgomery Dark. Um, I think he actually makes the wraparound main story work in a way that it wouldn't if you threw another actor into that role. I just can't speak enough about Clancy Brown's performance in this role. In a lot of ways, it makes the whole wraparound story better than it otherwise would have been if he wasn't in it. Then the cinematography and the look of the movie, especially in the wraparound main story, you got to talk about that. It's really strong, and this movie has a great aesthetic to it, especially the main story. Very dark. It's got a dark, like Tim Burton feel, but it looks really clean at the same time. It's just a really impressive look to the movie. Um, and it definitely gives you those major fall slash Halloween vibes. So even though this isn't a Halloween movie per se, when you watch it, especially the wraparound main story, it's got Halloween written all over it. And that's why it's part of my 31 horror movies in October Halloween series. Because when I watched this movie back in April of this year on net or on Shudder, I should say, um, all I could think about was I got to have this for Halloween this year. It's just so effective. Such as gives off so many great Halloween vibes. So, um, yeah, and that brings me to my next pro, which is I really love the atmosphere of the movie. There's something extra creepy and unsettling to start with about a funeral home or mortuary, and in this movie they really effectively show that through the tone, the atmosphere, the effects that they use, the look, as I talked about before, just all top notch across the board there. I think the final short, segment four, which is the Babysitter Murders, has a really interesting and fun twist in it. That would also, which also eventually ties back to the main framing story. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but in segment four, it's just a really interesting twist. And besides tying to the overall main story, it's a twist that works pretty well for the most part, despite a couple little issues that I have. Which again, I can't say too much about. Maybe at some point I'll do a spoiler filled review on this movie, but not here. And then there's also another really even more effective twist that might be a little bit more predictable in the final part of the main framing story to this movie. It's so well executed, and it makes for a really strong close to the movie, in my opinion. Um, Ryan Spindell, who directed this movie, just did a phenomenal job. You can tell that he really cares about horror anthologies. He gets horror anthologies, and he made this horror anthology based on that knowledge. Just a really good job directing with the amount of time and detail that he puts into the wraparound main story, to the filming techniques he uses, to the effects, the overall tone he was going for. He just did a phenomenal job with this movie. Um, Besides that, there are some really effective and gross blood and gore moments in the entire movie, mostly in the segments, but in the movie as a whole, just very effective, like gross out sort of blood and gore scenes. That's very effective. Specifically in Unprotected, the second segment, Till Death, excuse me, Till Death, the third segment, and the Babysitter Murders, the fourth segment. Those have the best sort of gore and gross out moments with blood and stuff. Nothing's overly disturbing though. Despite that, it's really more fun and disgusting, when it comes to the gore and the blood. And then of course you got to talk about the effective and eerie movie score throughout the movie. It was really well done. Really adds to the lore and the feel of the movie. And then, of course, I can't talk about the pros without talking about the makeup effects that are used for the characters, specifically Montgomery Dark. I mean, Clancy Brown is really dressed up well here, and very effective makeup effects throughout the whole movie, but he really leads the way with it in his character. So, yeah, if that's not enough pros for it, I could probably come up with five or six more. But yeah, I just absolutely love this movie. As far as any cons go, they're all pretty nitpicky. I will say none of the individual segments are all that scary or terrifying, especially like disturbingly so. But even like fun scary, they're kind of more interesting, kind of fun with gore and twists and lessons. This movie definitely has some morale tales and some lessons that are given. Um, but there's not really any like jump scares or any moments in the movie that I was overly scared during that part. Also, when they do use CGI, it's not really not that effective. They don't use a lot in this movie. They try to use more practical effects, but the CGI they do use is pretty bad in my opinion. Especially like the first part, the first segment, and I'm not going to give away too much of what it is, but there's something that happens towards the end of that first segment, the very short one, and they use CGI there, and it doesn't look great. There's a few special effects that don't work in general from the practical side, specifically at the final, like the final 10 or 15 minutes of the movie and the main framing story. Again, I don't want to say too much about it, but um, let's just say something comes out of some books that fall off of some shelves, and they're not quite as. I think they could have been more terrifying what comes out of those books than what actually was. That's about as much as I'll say about it. It's also a little bit longer of an anthology movie than some people may like. It didn't bother me. It's closer to 2 hours than it is the standard 90-minute horror movie, or a horror, especially for a horror anthology. I know they like to keep it around 90 minutes. But it really doesn't bother me. You could argue that the end of the framing story, it kind of goes on a little longer than it needed to, like 10 or 15 minutes. But I don't know. Like I said, I love the framing story, the main story. You're not going to get me to say much that's going to rip on that, other than what I've already mentioned. And even those are nitpicky cons, like I said. I will say the first segment, and I've kind of softened on this. I have it in my notes. The one that's only like 5 minutes long, the first segment with the woman in the 1950s that goes in the bathroom with the wallets that she pickpocketed. It's just kind of it's probably the most forgettable of all the segments here. But the fact that it's so short, they didn't. They kind of knew, I think, and I think it was meant to be sort of a setup of what was to come. Not really like one of the main. Clearly, you have three main segments, and then this is sort of a pre segment that's very short, and it's because it's so short, I don't think it's definitely not a black eye on on the movie overall. But I do feel like it could have been skipped. That's what I have in my notes. But again, I've softened on that even since I've done my notes on this movie. I can watch it; doesn't hold anything back, and I think they knew the fact that they made it so short that it doesn't overstay its welcome. I guess is the best way to say it. So that's really all I got for cons. Like I said, those are nitpicky ones at that. But if you haven't seen this movie, guys, absolutely check it out. I know some people were kind of scared off by the poster art and stuff. It kind of made it look like a little bit more of a kidsy movie or than it actually is. It's not a kidsy movie. It's just a very effective, very good looking movie, but it has a lot of adult themes in it. Believe me, it's definitely not for kids. Um, but I can't recommend this movie highly enough. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 on my rating. If you haven't seen this movie, check it out. It's still on Shudder. I just saw it the other day. I would even recommend going out and getting it on Blu-ray, which was released on, I believe, the end of last year, so like a year ago, right before Halloween. It is a very good Halloween-y kind of movie. Um, it's just got a great Halloween vibe to it, as I said, even though it's not directly related to the holiday itself. But a very good watch around Halloween, or really any time of the year. But 9 out of 10 for my rating. Go ahead and comment down below if you guys have seen this. Try to keep it somewhat spoiler free. Don't give too much away, especially as it relates to any of the twists in the movie. Um, but yeah, give me your pros and cons, what you liked about it, what you didn't. Like this video, hit the little notification bell below so you don't miss any of my upcoming review videos. And make sure to subscribe to my channel. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of my great horror content coming, including the rest of this 31 horror movie series, which only has 3 days to go. But also what I have coming up with taking a look at a certain classic TV anthology movie that I'll be starting in November. So thank you for watching this video. Watch the Mortuary Collection. It's awesome. One of the best horror anthologies for my money. But thank you for watching. Stay scared. Bye.